Today we'll discuss 5 different methods you can use to calculate whether or not you're on track for retirement. So not long ago we posted a video on YouTube that covered how much you would need to save as a percentage of your income in order to replace 80% of that income given a certain number of years to retirement. In other words, how much of each paycheck should you withhold if you're 10, 20, or 30 years or whatever away from retirement. Now, thankfully, a lot of people watched the video, but the way the calculation was set up, it was for someone who's just starting out. So it assumed you had a $0 balance. But what if you already have saved quite a bit for retirement and you just want to know if you're on the right track on your journey to retiring at a certain age? Well, like I said at the beginning of the video, we're going to cover 5 different ways or methods you can use to figure that out. But because it's a specific to you question, in other words, only you know how much you have, and only you know how much more you need or how much longer you have until you get to retirement, there's not really a formula I can give you. There's several different, back of the napkin methods we'll go over. Each one will get a little more accurate and complex as we go. Hopefully you can adopt one of these methods that'll help you out. Method number 1 is the Fidelity Multipliers of Income method. I have actually seen this method from several investment companies, but Fidelity is the earliest one I remember, so I'm just going to give them credit. And it's pretty simple. Basically, they take an age range and they give you a multiplier times the income that you have now to declare whether or not you're on track for retirement. So example, in this table, if you're 40 years old, you should have 3 times your income. So if your income was $100,000 a year, at 40 years old, you should have at least $300,000 saved for retirement. Obviously, this is a very simple way to calculate or measure your progress on your road to retirement. Honestly, I've never looked into how Fidelity arrived at these numbers. I'm sure it was based on a lot of data for investors that they actually have investing in their company, and it's probably the summation of a very average portfolio or retirement account. The only problem with that is everyone is unique. So the result you get from this may not be very accurate for some people. I still think it's a good tool to have, but just take it with a grain of salt. It may not be exactly what you need. It's just more of a quick go by, something to evaluate against. One of the major issues I have with this table is for age 67, it says you need 10 times your annual salary in order to retire. Frankly, I don't think that's enough. Now, it may assume that you have a certain portion of your income covered by Social Security, maybe 40 to 60% you'll start receiving at full retirement age or age 67 from Social Security. And I guess if that's the case, it's probably okay, but that's a big assumption to make for everyone. For example, if 10x was all you had saved for retirement and you were spending about 70% of your pre-retirement income, that's a drawdown rate of 7% annually, which is really, really high. Now, the widely accepted rule of thumb is a 4% drawdown rate for a 30-year retirement. So 7% would be for a much shorter retirement, and it's just not appropriate for someone who's age 67. Now, since I didn't agree with Fidelity, I made my own table, which I put on the screen now. Again, just a rule of thumb, just a back of the napkin way to estimate whether or not you're on track. As you can see, I ramp things up a bit the older you get, and that's because compounding interest should be at your back at this point. It should be helping you build your portfolio. You should be seeing multiples of income in your portfolio and your assets. They should be growing truthfully faster than you can contribute to them, faster than you're earning income from your own job by the time you retire, because they're going to need to replace that annual income completely. Method number 2 is the Millionaire Next Door method. Now, back in 1996, Thomas Stanley and William Danko published the famous book, The Millionaire Next Door. Now, the purpose of the book was to highlight how the average millionaire back in 1996, which there were far fewer back then, really lived a pretty normal lifestyle. Most of their wealth was hidden or secret. They didn't live very flamboyant lifestyles, didn't have really large houses, didn't drive really fancy cars. They were really average people, like the people next door, your neighbors. Now, as a part of their process for evaluating millionaires, Stanley and Danko created a formula that put everyone in one of 3 categories. There was an under-average accumulator of wealth, an average accumulator of wealth, and a prodigious accumulator of wealth. The prodigious accumulator of wealth basically was accumulating wealth at twice the rate of an average accumulator of wealth, and an average accumulator of wealth at twice the rate of an under-average accumulator of wealth. Now, the formula they used was to take your age, multiply it times your pre-tax income, divide that by 10, and that should give you your expected net worth. So the prodigious accumulators of wealth would have twice this amount. The under-average accumulators of wealth would have half of this amount. So for example, if you're 50 years old and earned $100,000 a year, you should have $500,000 saved for retirement. This is actually a pretty good formula to use. It's better than the simple multipliers of wealth that Fidelity had, but it's not perfect. The younger you are, the harder it is to actually meet the average or prodigious accumulator of wealth category as a result of the formula. So for example, if you take the same example from above but apply it to a 25-year-old, you should have $250,000 net worth to be an average accumulator of wealth. A net worth of $250,000 at age 25 would put you in like the 94th percentile for overall net worth. So not exactly an accurate or fair tool for young people. Not only that, but when you think about it, at 25 years old, if you kept the same salary and you're only supposed to have $500,000 in another 25 years, that means their portfolio would only double once in that whole time. So it's not very realistic for younger folks. Really, once you get past 40, that formula makes a little more sense. But if you're in your 30s or 20s and you're using this formula, don't be shocked if you don't like the result. That brings us to method number 3, which is the Money Guy method. So the Money Guy Show is a podcast and YouTube channel. I watch them frequently. They're really quite knowledgeable. They have a southern accent like me, so naturally I like them. So the hosts of the show are two guys named Brian and Bo. They're both big fans of the Millionaire Next Door, but they also saw the issues with the formula for young people, so they created an adjustment to the formula themselves. Their formula is pretty similar in that you'll take your age and multiply it times your income. But then you'll divide it by the number of years until you reach age 40 and add 10. So age times income divided by number of years to 40 plus 10, that should give you your expected net worth. So in this scenario, if you were 25 years old and had an annual income of $50,000, your average accumulator of wealth number would be $50,000. Now granted, $50,000 for a 25-year-old is still pretty aggressive, but it's much more realistic than the $250,000 number that we had for the Millionaire Next Door method. Now in the Money Guy method, once you reach age 40, you just go back to the Millionaire Next Door method, meaning you'll have 0 years until 40. So you're just dividing by 10, just like you would in the Millionaire Next Door method. And again, it's a pretty simple formula, but it is adding a layer of complexity that should give you a more accurate representation of where you should be to be on track. By the way, if the information in this video is helpful to you, please show your appreciation by clicking like and subscribe below. That'll help our channel to grow and allow me to keep making videos so I can help people with personal finance. Method number 4 is the future value equation. In this method, we're simply using the formula to calculate future value based on certain present value conditions. So I got the formula on your screen now, where future value equals present value times 1 plus a rate of return raised to the nth power, which is the number of periods that you're experiencing a return on your investment. So for example, let's assume you have $100,000 now and you want to know what it'll be worth in 25 years, assuming an 8% annual rate of return. Well, if we plug all those numbers into the formula, you can see we get a value of just under $685,000. Now that's really helpful, but it doesn't account for any future contributions you make to that $100,000 sum. In other words, if your portfolio value is $100,000 and you use this formula, it's just going to tell you how much that $100,000 is going to grow in 25 years. It's not going to tell you how much that $100,000 is going to grow if you add $5,000 a year, or you add $5,000 for a few years and then take a few years off. To calculate the amount while you're adding payments to your account, there's a much more complex formula which we have on your screen now. I'm not going to read the formula out, but FV is obviously future value. PMT represents payment, or the amount that you're paying in. N is the number of periods, and then R is your expected rate of return. So we have that same 8% rate of return for 25 years, but we're making a $5,000 contribution. You can see that would be worth just under $395,000 after 25 years. Now, if you're making contributions or payments to the account on a monthly basis, then you'll have to tweak the formula a little bit. First, you need to divide the payment amount by 12. If it's a monthly formula, by 24 if you're doing it twice a month, by 26 if you're doing it bi-weekly. And then also divide the interest rate by that same amount, so it kind of calibrates. And then multiply the number of periods. So if you had 25 years at 12 months, what would that be? 300 periods, I think. But then your interest rate would be 8% divided by 12, and your payment would be $5,000 divided by 12. Now, one thing you'll note about this formula, it left out the present value, or the existing balance you had in your portfolio, that $100,000 we talked about earlier. To get the whole picture, you'll actually combine this formula with that formula. So you have the future value of a lump sum that already exists in the account. I think that was around $695,000. Then you have the secondary amount, which was just under $385,000 for the $5,000 annual payments that you'll make into the plan. And that gives you a final total of just under $1,080,000. Now, like I said, these are more complex, but if you've done some basic math, you should be able to handle them. And the more you use these equations, the better you'll get. at sort of running through them. All right, method number 5, and the method I use, is to build a spreadsheet. The reason I do this is because it takes the formulas we just went through and it pulls them down into Excel, into a table where we can make changes. We can change the interest rate, we can change the number of periods, we can change the payments, we can account for inflation, and we can factor those and build them into a table full of equations to see progress over time. I first created this spreadsheet when I was about 26 years old. I've been using it ever since. It's personally how I keep track of our income. It's how I forecast retirement. It's how I forecast future value of investments that we have. It's a really great way to take these highly technical equations and break them down into small pieces and then give you the flexibility to adjust it for your personal needs over time. Now, instead of trying to show you how to do this in front of a wall with some lights behind me, I've actually recorded another video on the computer, which we'll skip over to now. Hey everybody, so what I want to do is show you guys how to build a spreadsheet where you're basically forecasting a projected portfolio value based on a number of variables, one being a beginning balance. So if you already have an invested balance, it'll be based off of what you already have in there. It'll also add any contributions you want to make. We'll do this on an annual basis to kind of keep it simple, but you could do monthly payments if you wanted to, weekly, bi-weekly, however you want to set it up. You'll just need to you'll need to change or augment the formulas based on whatever scenario you want to accommodate. We're going to keep this one pretty simple since it's in a video. It'll also be your rate of return is the other variable that you'll have in here. So basically just want to go through step by step, show you how I set it up. This is actually a spreadsheet I've used for like 20 years. This is not the exact one, but basically how I forecast to project basically the future retirement portfolio value or investment portfolio value based on current conditions, contributions, etc. So real simply, I'll just kind of walk through what I start by doing, and I already have one of these set up. I'll probably just copy and paste this a lot just to speed it up. But I'll start by setting my column headers. We're going to have a header for basically everything. Let me widen these a little bit so you can see. The year, this could be an actual year like the year 2025, 26, 27, and so on. It could be your age. That's how I have mine set up, so I know how old I'll be at every point that I have a certain portfolio balance. You could do it just by years from the starting point, years to retirement, however you're going to set it up. But what I'm going to do is just populate it with a series of years. And the example we had in the video, we had been doing the formulas previously. We just had a 25-year horizon, so I'm going to set that up. We said that there would be a beginning balance of 100 grand, contributions of $5,000 annually, a rate of return of 8%. And these two are dependent variables. This is what's going to come. Projected earnings as a result of your rate of return based on your contributions, your beginning balance. Your ending balance, of course, is the actual earnings you received plus the contributions and the beginning balance. Now, instead of populating these cells with the data that we want to use, I like to create my independent variables in cells over here. So those independent variables, again, were beginning balance, contributions, and rate of return. In fact, let me just copy and paste these for the sake of time. Just drop them in here so you can see them. We're not going to need a big column for that. I'm try to condense this a little bit. So anyway, you can see now I've got my beginning balance, contributions, and rate of return. And then I'm just going to basically tie the cells in this column, in this table, over to these independent variables. That way I can come back and change these. And if I have formulas here, they'll just update automatically based on the 3 independent variables I have in my spreadsheet. So beginning balance is going to be, we're just going to enter a formula in the cell B2 equals H3, or H2, and boom, there your $100,000 comes over. Now we said we're going to enter $5,000 a year. That comes out of H3. So we tie that together, and then our rate of return is 8%. Tie that in. Now, for projected earnings, this is a result of your beginning balance plus your contributions divided by, multiplied by your rate of return. And that's how that formula is set up. Which you also, pardon me, I'm trying to look around the camera here. You also want to go in and basically put a parentheses around these cell numbers so it does the proper order of operations. And this is going to give you projected earnings for beginning of year contribution. So in other words, if this was an annual basis, what it's going to assume is that you're going to get 8% return on $105,000, not $5,000 made in $416 monthly installments for 12 months. To do that, you'd need to change your contribution amount. You could stretch this out so it's done annually, or you could divide your rate of return by 12 and then set up the formulas a little. You actually need to alter the formulas a little bit too. But I'm not going to go through that in this video just because it's a pain to set up. So anyway, that's your projected earning, $84,000 on $105,000 beginning balance. The ending balance is the sum of your beginning balance plus your contributions plus your earnings, and that gives you $113,400. Okay, that's year one. Okay, to populate the second row, we're going to tie it to the end of the previous year. So the ending balance from year one is going to be your beginning balance for year two, like so. All right, your contributions are going to be the same. We're just going to tie it with this formula, just a simple, C3 is going to equal C2. Your rate of return is going to be the same, so D3 is going to equal D2. Your projected earnings, you're going to use the same formula, so you're just going to pull this down one. It's going to take the same formula that was in E2 and pull it down a row so that it applies to the data that's in row 3. And you have 9472 now because you got the compounding interest effect. And same thing on the ending balance, it's just going to add the same 3 cells as before to give you an end of year balance of $127,872. Okay. The great thing now is we can just drag these all the way down through year 25 and it'll populate the rest of our table for us. There's 2 ways you can do that. One is you can just grab this little green square in the bottom right corner and drag it all the way down to year 25. Now notice none of this populates yet because there's no data in these cells. You can also just double click this and it'll populate. These again are independent variables, so they aren't depending on the data being entered for F. Projected earnings is going to be low because we don't have a beginning balance, and this is when it's all going to fill in. We just double click this, and now you can see the whole sheet is populated with data. So for 25 years, just like we had in the formula example earlier in the video, you can see we have an ending balance of $1,079,619.60. And again, that's the combination of, let's pretend we don't make any contributions, the $684,847 based on the $100,000 beginning balance and the future value of that. And then if we take out the beginning balance and just make $5,000 contributions, that's the $394,772.08 that we had in the previous example from the formulas that we showed you earlier. So I like this way because I can play with these variables. You can see what a 12% rate of return would do. You can see what a 4% rate of return would do, 10%, back to 8, whatever, and it changes it. So you can project and see, how variables in the economy or in the portfolio returns you see actually impact the overall value over time. I've kept this up for decades, but you could throw this together in no time and do some projections based on future savings rates and whatnot, and hopefully it's helpful to you. And the other thing, if you've set it up one time and you save it and you want to add some complexity to it, like you could add a variable here to account for inflation by just adding, say, a 3%, and then carrying it all the way through. Now you got inflation, your contribution level goes up because you got a 3% inflation factor built into it. And you can see how that would impact it over time. So there's lots of ways you can play with it. It's just a matter of how complex you want to get with the formulas. Hopefully that's helpful to you. I want to hit a couple of points before we wrap up. First off, all of these methods are just ways to approximate a future value based on a certain number of variables that you insert into some equations. Even the most sophisticated financial plans and financial planning software can't account for everything, and they have assumptions that are based on expectations that may or may not actually play out in real life. Personally, I found using the spreadsheet gives me a place to put all the complexity I want into a program. I can make adjustments if I need to, and I can record progress over time, and that's really, I think, the big piece. You need to teach yourself how to do this so that you can check in every year or so, see how you're doing. It's just like any journey. You don't really set off and go in a straight line. There's turns and twists and changes along the way, and you need to be flexible enough to adjust that. So the best thing you can do is just teach yourself how to calculate this, how to forecast these things, make a record of it, come back to it, and tweak it as you go. I mean, truthfully, that's exactly what a financial planner would do if you hired them to manage your finances for you. They're going to generate a financial plan, but they're going to hang on to all the assumptions they made. And as you need updates, you'll go to them and give them new information about your income, about your family situation, about your goals, and they'll make tweaks. Well, you can pay somebody to do that, certainly, or you can do it yourself. And as simple as Excel is, I highly recommend that you use it. You can also use Google Sheets, which is a free version that's very similar to Excel that you can do the same stuff in. The other thing is the outputs are only as accurate as the inputs that you put into them. In other words, the variables that you throw in. You can assume a 16% rate of return, but actually achieving that is a totally different matter. You can assume that you'll retire in 10 years, but being ready to do that is another matter. The quality of the inputs you put into these formulas will inform the quality of the results. I certainly hope the information in this video has been helpful to you. We have plenty more on our YouTube channel and our website, martinmoney.com. Please feel free to check those out if you have time. As always, we are grateful for your interest in our videos and for your time watching them. God bless and take care.